I want to make money betting on the NFL in 2020. But are the Titans still the best team in the AFC South? How do I bet on the Jaguars, Colts, Texans, and Titans? I need information I can use from week 1 through the playoffs. Welcome back to aosportspicks TV. I'm Alpha Omega. Now that we have a few weeks of the 2020 NFL season in the books, there is enough statistical data from 2020 for me to put out videos giving fairly accurate projections for each team throughout the rest of the season, as well as the playoffs. This video covers every team in the AFC South. And for all of you who are new to the channel or new to sports betting, the AFC South is the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Indianapolis Colts, the Houston Texans, and the Tennessee Titans. This video is one part of a playlist providing season updates on every team in the NFL. I designed the entire playlist to be useful from now through the end of the season. So it doesn't matter when you find these videos, you can still use them to make money. Once you finish this video, you can find the playlist by clicking the link in the pinned comment or in the description. I recommend you watch the whole playlist more than once because I'm putting a lot of information into each one of these videos. I also have timestamps in the progress bar and in the description so you can easily choose what you want to watch. After watching, you'll have more knowledge than your friends, you'll be able to create smarter DFS lineups, and most importantly to me, you can start making winning sports bets from now all the way through the championship. The legal sports betting boom is just beginning. According to the Legal Sports Report, another day, another sportsbook operator getting nearly $1 billion from the public markets. This time, it's newcomer Barstool Sportsbook. Penn National sold 16.1 million shares at $61 each to raise $982.1 million in gross proceeds. We're still in the early innings of legal sports betting, which is clear from how much cash everyone is raising. The Penn share sale brings cash raised by the parent companies of U.S. sportsbooks close to $4 billion in 2020. So let me explain how I bet on the NFL. Firstly, the NFL is an incredibly tough market that is notoriously difficult to succeed in year over year. This is how I've managed to win over the last few years. What I do is I take all of the information gathered from before the season started, meaning all of the trades, the injuries, free agency, the draft, the coaching changes, roster construction, all of the statistical data from 2019, and a lot more than that to start making my 2020 week-by-week predictions. Then I take the 2020 play-by-play statistical data from the weeks that have already been played to help determine where my projections are correct and where my projections are wrong for the upcoming week. Then I look for the best number from a list of every major sports book on whichever games I feel give me the best opportunity to make money. Finally, I do my best to get as much money down on those games as possible. My goal is to give you enough information to do the same thing. Having said that, let's get started. The Jacksonville Jaguars are no doubt one of the worst teams in football. I'm not talking New York Jets bad because that's a contender for all-time trash teams, but the Jags just aren't very good this year. In 2019, the Jags went 6-10, by all accounts exceeding expectations, which shows how bad they were expected to be last year. It was thought that the defensive pieces they still had may have made them competitive, but that went sideways in a hurry. They did get a big surprise with the competitive play out of their 6th-round quarterback, Gardner Minshew. Michael DeRocco of ESPN brings up Minshew's 2020 stats. Despite not having the strongest arm or being the biggest guy, he ranks in the top 5 in completion percentage and top 10 in passing touchdowns and in passer rating among NFL quarterbacks. The key question to ask about the future of this franchise is whether or not Gardner Minshew is a capable enough quarterback to compete for a division title. If so, the Jaguars are better served by investing all their assets into putting an amazing team around him while he's on a 6th-round pick's rookie contract. But before I go there, the personnel losses by Jacksonville were really severe, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. The Jags lost blue-chip CB1 Jalen Ramsey via trade. More hugely important, they also lost CB2 AJ Bouye. Calais Campbell is also gone to the Ravens. And according to Jamison Hensley at ESPN, the Baltimore Ravens have traded for Minnesota Vikings pass rusher Yannick Ngakoue, adding a critical component to the NFL's stingiest defense. The Ravens will send a 2021 third-round pick and a 2022 conditional fifth-round pick to the Vikings for Ngakoue, sources told ESPN's Adam Schefter. 2019 was an uneven season from the jump. Jacksonville signed Nick Foles in the offseason, but he hurts himself in the first game. Minshew was a sixth-round pick, and no one was fully expecting him to play. But he ended up starting a bunch of games and even played really well in a couple of them. He's not a terrible quarterback. He's got a great personality, and I like the fact that they're ready to do the 2020 season with him under center for a few different reasons. Now, this is not a season that they're even going to be competing for a wild card. So why not let it fly and see what you have with Minshew? Now, there are also some big-name quarterbacks coming up in the ranks in college. So if they don't like Minshew, the Jags need to be ready to draft. There was no point in bringing in a veteran and then being forced to start him just to get 1 or 2 extra wins in basically a throwaway season. Why not see if Minshew is the guy? I like that they're doing that. It's really smart. Dan Schmelzer of Fansided speaks on the Jags 2021 draft. Nearly everybody in the draft community has been predicting the Jacksonville Jaguars to pick high in the 2021 NFL draft and snag a new franchise quarterback. Whether they get in position to land Trevor Lawrence or snag Justin Fields or Trey Lance, sticking a quarterback in Jacksonville has consistently happened in most early mock drafts. That being said, Gardner Minshew continues to impress. Also, remember that former Washington football team head coach Jay Gruden is now the offensive coordinator in Jacksonville. Jay Gruden's not going to be the guy that takes an offense to some higher level, but he's not terrible either. What Gruden was bad at was being the leader of a program. Taking the responsibilities of a head coach away from him and looking at Gruden's history as an offensive coordinator, he's not going to be top 10, but with the offense they have right now, having someone with experience like Gruden to kind of see what you have talent-wise is a good thing. If I'm the GM of this team, I'm telling Gruden that his most important job this season is to see what we have with Gardner Minshew and if we can go forward with him. Based on what I've seen so far this season, there is probably some truth to that. This hasn't been a run-first offense, but the deep ball percentage needs to go up. This can't be a short passing offense because they need to see if Minshew is capable of delivering as an NFL quarterback. His depth of target and deep ball percentage has to go up, and the Jags have to be throwing a bunch and also give Minshew advantageous spots to do it. Don't just throw it to throw it. Get him moving around West Coast style and work in some pre-snap motion to try to help him out. According to John Shipley from SI.com, after the Jacksonville Jaguars averaged nearly 30 points per game through the first 2 weeks, the Jaguars fell back to earth in a big way in a 31-13 Week 3 loss to the Dolphins. One person who is taking the vast majority of the blame for the performance, offensive coordinator Jay Gruden. I didn't call a good enough game for Gardner to have success, so that's on me. It was not a great game plan by us. What does this Jaguars team do well offensively? The answer is not very much. They're great at traveling to London every year, but that's about it. They did cut loose Leonard Fournette, which is a good thing for them both short-term and long-term. Now, I've seen some make an argument that in 2019, Fournette had more rushing yards than Dalvin Cook, which is true but also misleading. The Jags ranked 30th in success rate. So what does that mean if Fournette outgains Dalvin Cook, but the running game ranks so low in success rate? Let's find out. It means that a lot of those yards are garbage yards. The definition of success rate is dependent on which position you use it for. But when you measure success rate for a running back, it depends on the down. On first down, you need to get 40% of the needed yards to gain in order to be called a successful play. You need 60% of the needed yards on second down, or 100% of the needed yards on third or fourth down. That's how you measure the success rate of a running back. The overarching point? A lot of Fournette's runs were meaningless. It's not so difficult to gain 7 yards off a draw play on 3rd and 15. The defense doesn't care about that. It makes your stats look good, but by no means is that a successful play. A 7-yard run on first down is great, but on 3rd and 15, 3rd and 20, the defense is happy to give up a 7 to 10-yard gain and force a punt. Having said that, the Jags have a decent receiving threat in DJ Chark. He's above average overall, but below average when he's the number one target. Even with Chark being all right, there are serious questions about the talent on the offensive line, questions about the other weapons in the passing game, questions about the usage, deployment, and explosiveness of running backs James Robinson and Chris Thompson. And I don't think Minshew's ceiling is all that high. As much as I like the guy, those are the facts. It's tough for me to say that Minshew is the guy that can lead you in a comeback from being down 2 scores. He can potentially put together a game-winning drive. We've already seen it more than once. He can definitely stick his nose in there and get tough yards, and there will never be a question about his effort. But even if everything goes right, the absolute best case scenario, if Gruden develops the perfect offense for Minshew and he develops perfectly, you're still talking about maybe the 20th best quarterback in the league. That's not good enough. I don't see this season setting up well at all for this team to find success. Kathy Clark at Fansided keeps it short and sweet. It is unlikely the Jaguars will have a winning season in 2020, and most pundits state they have the least talented roster and may be in contention for the number 1 draft choice. Also, there are some hard feelings and angry ex-Jaguars scattered in the NFL. The biggest problem with this team is head coach Doug Marrone. I don't understand the vision in retaining Marrone because he looks like the biggest lame duck among current head coaches not named Adam Gase. It's going to be really tough to justify holding on to this guy in 2021. What usually happens when the coach keeps winning 5 games season after season? He gets fired and you start from scratch. Now, if you're questioning if that's the right decision, ask yourself what his contribution is to the development of the team. We've all seen some of the best defensive players in the league come through Jacksonville, and all of them either bailed on the team and the coach or never realized their full potential. All of that spells doom for Marrone, and it will be a good day when he gets the boot. Having said that, this is Jay Gruden's big chance to con his way right back into the head coach's chair by making this offense look good, but not good enough for Marrone to keep his job. Gruden's best case scenario is to only win 5 games, but also have Gardner Minshew take a big step forward. The offense looks good, but I'm only the offensive coordinator. I can't help it if the defense is bad. Shahid Khan listens to that scam, dumps Marrone, decides to hire from within, and bam, Gruden is back in the saddle in a year. Now, holding on to Marrone or promoting Gruden would be huge mistakes. But don't be surprised if one of the two ends up happening. According to Matt Miller at the Bleacher Report, Doug Marrone hasn't dominated the win column, but people around the league believe he has the support of ownership. And barring a major disappointment of a season, he'll be back to navigate the rebuild. And while Marrone doesn't necessarily inspire awe as a strategist, insiders rave about his leadership skills. Final thoughts on the Jaguars? My head tells me that Minshew will never even be a league average quarterback, but my heart wants him to be good. He's fun, he's a character, and the league is better off with guys like him in it. If Marrone continues to lose the team, and especially if Minshew doesn't take a significant step forward, then it makes a ton of sense to tank and position yourself for a top 3 pick in the draft. At that point, it's imperative you do whatever you have to do to get a quarterback. Finally, looking at the schedule, there's high competition in this division, and it's going to be tough for a team with no talent to get division wins. The Jaguars do have a lot of coin flip games where they're under a field goal dog, and this team will win a few games despite themselves. Some betting notes: bet this team when they're big dogs, similar to the Dolphins during that stretch last year. The Jags, like the Dolphins, will lose some games by a ton of points, which will inflate the spreads, and that will be the time to jump on Minshew mania and make some money. Moving to the Indianapolis Colts, the question of where the remaining 3 teams in the AFC South rank is difficult to answer. One team has a star quarterback, one team has a star running back, and the other is a team with a lot of offseason signings and expectations. But Tennessee made the AFC title game in 2019 and appears to be on track to make the playoffs again, so the Titans have to be the leader of the division. Now, some sharp bettors are very high on Indy, but I'm not sold on the move with Rivers, and neither am I sold on this team as a whole. If you're asking me to choose between the Texans and the Colts, I'll take the Texans, even with that losing streak. The Colts do have continuity at the coaching positions. I think Rivers has stepped in and played well so far. He's a hard worker and he's a smart player. Kevin Bowen of 107.5 Indianapolis provides proof of Rivers' ability. Rivers currently ranks 1st in the NFL in completion percentage and 5th in yards per pass attempt. Rivers is 8th in the NFL with pass plays of at least 20 yards. It's been an unquestioned upgrade at the quarterback position, even with the Colts still needing to cap drives better, both on 3rd down and in the red zone. Overall, I'm pessimistic on the offseason moves and where Indy is headed as a team. The Colts have some great pieces where it's like, oh, that's awesome. And then you look at other spots on the roster and you're like, what the hell are they doing? Let's start with head coach Frank Reich. I like Reich. He was awesome 2 years ago in 2018. Overachieved big time, made great play calls, knew when to push the envelope, identified high leverage spots, and took advantage of it all. It really brought into question whether Frank Reich was the secret sauce behind the Eagles' championship run. I went into last season with Reich easily in my top 5 coaches, but 2019 wasn't an easy year for the Colts. Andrew Luck retired seemingly out of nowhere, so in steps Jacoby Brissett, then Brissett gets hurt. The entire system that they had last year and the mold-breaking concepts were pretty much all gone. And at certain times during the season, notably in situations where they should have been able to press their advantages, they were underwhelming. From Mike Wells of ESPN, Reich met his match in the 2019 campaign. The Colts went from riding high after a 5-2 start to collapsing down the stretch, losing 7 of their final 9 games and missing the playoffs. Reich, who is known for his comebacks on the field during his playing career, couldn't stop his team from spiraling out of control. The decision to stick with Vinatieri encapsulated the regression of Reich last year as a decision maker. They had an older kicker who had proven that he can only do certain things, yet they kept dragging him out there, having the guy continue to attempt field goals. It made no sense when the team was getting a lot of yards with their highly ranked offensive line. And in short yardage situations where that line could get you those yards, Reich chose instead to kick a field goal with old man Vinatieri. It really made no sense to me at all, and it makes me question Frank Reich's decision-making as a whole. Early into the 2020 campaign, I still don't know if Reich is going to swing back to being the creative guy from the past or whether the regression is going to continue. According to Jim Aiello of the Indy Star, in his final news conference of the 2019 season, Indianapolis Colts coach Frank Reich said he had no regrets about the way the Adam Vinatieri situation was handled this year. Despite the kicker's year-long struggles, Reich and the Colts consistently supported him for 12 games until he hit injured reserve earlier this month. That's not good. Moving up the ladder, it's well known that general manager Chris Ballard is extremely well liked in NFL circles and thought to be one of the better GMs in football. Okay, if that's true, what the hell happened in the offseason? It made no sense. Why did Ballard bring in a cast-off, old, over-the-hill quarterback and then decide to pay him $25 million a year? Who else was trying so hard to sign Phillip Rivers that Ballard needed to give him $25 million a year at this point in his career? Now, it's not so much the Rivers signing that was a mistake as much as the price that they paid for him. They got the retread veteran quarterback, but they didn't get the retread discount, which is a huge part of the whole retread thing. Just ask Jameis Winston. Speaking of Jameis, I'll put a link at the top of the screen to my Saints season update where I talk a bit about Jameis. The trading of the Colts' 2020 first-round pick for DeForest Buckner was unnecessary. I understand the Colts had a bunch of cap space and wanted an impact player to make a difference in the run-stopping game, but for Ballard to give a first-round pick for Buckner when they had all this money and could have developed a list of potential free agents made no sense. According to Robert Smith of Niner Noise, with Buckner set for a huge contract extension and with a host of players set to become free agents, General Manager John Lynch made the decision to trade Buckner. With the offseason trade of Buckner to the Indianapolis Colts, it freed up more than $12 million in cap space and eventually cleared the path for Lynch to parlay that 13th overall pick into 2 first-round picks instead of just 1. The team used those to draft defensive lineman Javon Kinlaw and receiver Brandon Ayuk. The Colts have Justin Houston and now DeForest Buckner on the line. But other than that, there are weaknesses literally everywhere on this defense. The secondary of the Colts is particularly concerning in terms of who Indy is lining up as their 2 starting cornerbacks, as well as the loss of safety Malik Hooker for the season with a ruptured Achilles. Offensively, there are problems in the passing game in terms of wide receiver depth, made even clearer by the knee injury to wide receiver Paris Campbell that may end up keeping him out the rest of the year. The list goes on. From a team-building standpoint, Chris Ballard screwed up in the 2020 offseason in a big way. And what's sad is that a team that had so much promise a couple of years ago, with all these assets they had accumulated and a very good draft, is probably going to end up being for nothing because they have exploitable positions all over the field. And the roster holes could end up being the Achilles heel for the team in 2020. According to WalterFootball.com, the Colts' defensive backfield, particularly the cornerbacks, happens to be the worst aspect of their defense. Indianapolis signed Xavier Rhodes this offseason. Rhodes was abysmal last year, but he appeared to be injured. There's a chance he could return to prominence in 2020. TJ Carey and Marvell Tell are the other outside corners, and both struggled last year. Malik Hooker is a fantastic young player whose absence is felt whenever he's injured. Health has been Hooker's weakness as he has yet to play a full season. So far in 2020, Rivers has certainly played better with the Colts offensive line, providing protection, but he continues to make the same mistakes he's been known for more than a decade. People who like the idea of Rivers on the Colts try to point out that he wasn't all that bad last year, and the reason that he threw so many picks was because he was under duress all the time because the O-line for the Chargers was horrible. And by putting him in a more stable situation where he has some absolute beasts on the O-line, like in Indianapolis, he's going to have enough time to make smart reads. That may be true, but the Colts don't have anywhere close to the same level of offensive weapons as the Chargers. And equipped with that knowledge, the Colts used their second-round pick on a running back? Now, in the short term of the 2020 season, the addition of Jonathan Taylor may not be so bad because Marlon Mack tore his Achilles. And Taylor may end up being the Offensive Rookie of the Year. But so was Saquon Barkley, and that was a really stupid decision. I'll leave a link at the top of the screen to my New York Giants season update, where I talk extensively about how the Saquon Barkley pick was the beginning of the end for that team. Similarly, with the Colts drafting Taylor, it was just drafting a position that they didn't need. especially when they have all these other holes literally all over the field on both sides of the ball. From Andrew Aziz at SB Nation Indy, the running back wall is the hypothetical career touches figure that, once a running back reaches, signals the end of their career. Most people put the figure at around 2,400 to 2,600 career touches. Taylor has 968 career touches. Since we consider Marlon Mack to be an average running back, Taylor would need to be better than average to justify being worth a high draft pick and replacing Mack. If he becomes the better than average but worse than upper echelon running back, then he'll get you an extra 174 scrimmage yards per year or 11 extra scrimmage yards per game over Mack. The new question we need to ask ourselves is, was it worth spending a high second-round pick on a player who will get you an extra 11 yards per game over the guy he's replacing? Defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus's defensive scheme is so vanilla and so uninspiring, it's not surprising that opponents continually run wild all over him. This is a team whose success rate rests on a very thin margin of error, meaning when the Colts go up against opponents that have complete and effective offenses capable of moving the ball downfield, you can't have old man Rivers go up in the first quarter and throw a lame duck shot put that gets picked off and start you down a score before hardly any time has gone off the clock. That's what Rivers is known for. Now, he's played his way into games and won a lot of games because of his talent and his work ethic, but he's prone to making the bonehead mistake, especially early in games. And with the Colts defense being what it is, this team will be playing from behind often, which doesn't lend itself well to a quarterback who's prone to stupid early game decisions. The ideal situation for the Colts is to get out to an early lead, take the air out of the ball, and play keep away while limiting their below average defense from being on the field. According to Adam Stites of SB Nation, in 2019, the loss to the Chiefs in Week 11 was the 61st time in Rivers' career he's dropped a one-score game. By the end of the year, that number stretched to 63. According to ESPN, that's a record among quarterbacks in the Super Bowl era. That reflects poorly on Rivers, especially after finishing so many losses with interceptions. When the Hall of Fame eligibility window opens for Rivers, the talk will center around all the times he couldn't get the job done. Final thoughts on the Colts. If you're basing your opinions on what you've seen so far in 2020 out of Phillip Rivers and the Colts, it's important to consider the context. What I mean by that is don't overreact and suddenly want to bet on the Colts when Rivers has a good game against a bad defense. And the media starts the narrative of Rivers is back, comeback player of the year. Don't fall for that. A dominant win against a terrible team doesn't mean that much once you put the Colts' performance in context with the opposing defense. We've already seen that this is a team that will lose games they should win, like against the Jaguars in Week 1. And that's not going to be a one-time thing. More than almost any other team in the NFL, your evaluation and your projections for the Colts will need to be constantly updated to have any chance of betting them successfully. Finally, looking at the schedule, the Colts won't even be tested until Week 9 against the Ravens. The closest thing to a true test is against the Bears, but there's holes all over Chicago's defense. So until we see how the Colts fare against Baltimore, it's going to be a guessing game from week to week. Rivers could go for 300 yards and 2 to 4 touchdowns every week, and those defenses are so bad, we can't really take that much from it. One betting note following the same theme is to see how the Colts play against Baltimore and make your betting decisions for the rest of the season based on that performance. So we come to the Houston Texans. Houston finally fired Bill O'Brien, which is a move that was at least a year too late, but was the right move for the future of the franchise for reasons I'm going to explain. During the offseason, the Houston Texans made one of the worst trades of all time. And other than the 1989 Herschel Walker trade, I would say that this is the worst trade of all time, especially from a team that was doing some of the right things in terms of what needed to happen to take them to the next level. For example, the Texans had huge problems protecting their star quarterback. so they go out and trade for lineman Laramie Tunsil, which worked out favorably. Then to go and do something like this. And then to add salt in the wound by replacing DeAndre Hopkins with Randall Cobb and Brandon Cooks. Now, Cooks has had some success, but it's just not that easy to replace a player like DeAndre Hopkins. And the trade looks even worse with every passing week of the 2020 season as Hopkins lights up the league with Kyler Murray. Prior to his firing, village idiot Bill O'Brien and the Texans sat at the bottom of the division, with serious doubts about even making the playoffs. And while at this point the playoffs are just about out of the realm of possibility in 2020, firing Bill O'Brien gives this team a huge positive boost heading into the future. Leading up to the trade, there were issues between Hopkins and Bill O'Brien, and Hopkins himself spoke about it to Sports Illustrated. There was no relationship, Hopkins told SI of O'Brien. Make sure you put that in there. There's not a lot to speak about. Hopkins told the magazine that he knew how to get out of the situation in Houston. Hopkins said that by asking for a little raise, the team likely would instead shop him. Michael Irvin said on ESPN's Get Up that he talked to Hopkins after the trade and was told that the bad blood between Hopkins and O'Brien stemmed from a meeting in which the coach compared the situation to one he had in New England with Aaron Hernandez. I have a lot more to say about Bill O'Brien, and I'll get back to him momentarily. But this trade and O'Brien's firing requires more time to fully unpack. Without arguably the best receiver in football in Hopkins, everyone is seeing the fruits of an offense featuring Cooks, Cobb, and Will Fuller. Fuller is a player with a lot of potential. And while a past injury isn't a predictor for future injuries, Fuller is constantly hurt. And I would be shocked if he doesn't go down again at some point in 2020. In return for Hopkins, the Texans received a second-round pick in 2020, a fourth-round pick in 2021, and aging running back David Johnson, a guy who isn't coming close to putting up the same type of numbers he did a few years ago. To make matters even worse, the Texans also picked up Johnson's ridiculous contract. I'm a huge Deshaun Watson fan, which is why all of this is so frustrating. Watson is a bona fide star who could be so good in the right situation. And Watson's ability is important to consider when looking at the big picture mistake of this trade. Steve Kubica of Fansided talks about the loss of production. You can go down the list and see the reasons why Hopkins was so important. Kenny Stills finished the night with 0 receptions on 2 targets. Brandon Cooks had 2 receptions for 20 yards, and Randall Cobb barely got in the box score with 2 catches of his own for 23 yards. Stills, Cooks, and Cobb combined for over a $21 million cap hit in 2020. O'Brien essentially took money he could have given to Hopkins and gave it to several players who have no shot of replacing his production. Trading Hopkins only to sign Watson to an extension was one of the more counterproductive moves in recent NFL history. So let's break this down. 1. The Texans gave up a blue-chip player at a premium position in DeAndre Hopkins. 2. They took on an asset that has an outsized contract, and in return they get the performance of a replacement-level player with David Johnson. 3. Houston didn't get back any meaningful assets in terms of draft capital as the team headed into the 2020 draft. Literally one of the best drafts in the last decade. And they didn't even draft in the first round. Again. Then on top of all that, you put more pressure on your franchise player in Deshaun Watson. I don't think you could have done anything else to put more strain and pressure on Watson than by doing this. Bill O'Brien has always underachieved with this team. I mean, yeah, he got to the playoffs, but it was in spite of him rather than because of him. Because all he ever did was make terrible in-game decisions from a strategic and tactical standpoint. Now, the good news is that the McNair family and the Texans ownership group finally held Bill O'Brien accountable for the stewardship of the franchise and cut bait on him. So now, while the Texans already let O'Brien trade away DeAndre Hopkins, they do still have Deshaun Watson entering his prime, with every incentive to build on Watson's success into the future. From Michael Grant to the comeback, the net result from these moves: Houston didn't have a first-round pick this year. They won't have a first or second next year. Barring a trade, their next first-round selection will be in 2022. Next season, they're projected to have the sixth least amount of cap space, $9.7 million over. Also bear in mind that because of lost revenue due, next year's salary cap is likely to go down. It will be at least $175 million as compared to this year's $198.2 million. This is the Bill O'Brien experience. The fact that the Texans finally fired O'Brien does not make everything all better, because the trade itself, and more specifically all the years with O'Brien leading the team, has led to a butterfly effect that will continue to reverberate throughout the entire organization, not just in 2020, but projecting literally years into the future. Let me explain. As I already mentioned, the Texans go out and sign Randall Cobb. Cobb may be a contributing player to your franchise this season, but the Texans gave him a 3-year contract and a ridiculous amount of money. According to Chris Meisen of SportingNews.com, the Houston Texans have moved to sign Randall Cobb after their shock decision to trade DeAndre Hopkins to the Arizona Cardinals. Wide receiver Cobb has agreed to a 3-year, $27 million deal with Houston that contains $18.75 million in guarantees. After Houston signed Cobb, O'Brien decides to slander Hopkins as he's going out the door, which, while petty on its own merit, begs the question of how the Texans expect to hold on to their existing young players who may not want to re-sign with a franchise that is willing to allow their coaching staff to treat their best assets so poorly. From ESPN, after the trade, anonymous criticisms of Hopkins surfaced, claiming the wide receiver missed practices and calling into question the people Hopkins associated with and his decline in production in 2019. Before defending himself against those criticisms, he told SI, obviously we know where all that's coming from. He told SI the practice criticisms come from the 2018 season, when an ankle injury forced him to miss practice time but didn't sideline him for any games, and that there is no evidence his absence from practices hurt the team, and he had his best season in the NFL that year, finishing with 115 receptions and 1,572 yards. The Brandon Cook signing also felt reactionary. Just a head-scratching move in so many ways. Houston chose not to upgrade the tight end position, and they are also counting on a meaningful step forward from a bunch of offensive linemen not named Laramie Tunsil. I mean, besides Tunsil, the O-line is easily bottom 10 in the NFL. And Houston has massive liabilities with their defense, notably in the secondary. And at this point, it's almost impossible for them to repeat the 10-win season we saw from them in 2019. According to Mark Lane of Texans Wire, the Houston Texans offensive line has been an enigma in 2020. Despite returning the same 5 starters from a year ago, despite left tackle Laramie Tunsil coming off a Pro Bowl season, they look pedestrian. What's worse is quarterback Deshaun Watson has taken 20 quarterback hits through the first 2 games. No one wants to know if the 2-time Pro Bowler is tough enough to play all 16 games in a year where he had to take 160 hits. Similar to the way the Colts have squandered talent and choosing to go to war with Old Man Rivers, the same is true here. Houston has a quarterback entering his prime in Deshaun Watson. And this is who they're going to war with? Let's put even more pressure on him. Because guess what? If Houston wants to beat the Chiefs in the next few years, they're going to have to score 50 points to do it. Remember the playoffs last year? 24 points is not even close to enough. And it's really kind of sad because Watson is one of the most likable players in the NFL. The Texans did manage to re-sign Watson, and I really do feel bad that he didn't try to get out. Based on everything that I know about him, Watson is just too good of a guy and too loyal. If I was his representation, I would have gotten him the hell out of there because any franchise willing to hold on to Bill O'Brien for that long is not the place for any client of mine. From Aaron Wilson of Texas Sports Nation, Watson has reached another coveted milestone by achieving generational wealth through his blockbuster NFL contract, agreed to a 4-year, $156 million extension that averages $39 million annually and includes a $27 million signing bonus. There is a $1 million escalator clause from 2022 to 2025. Over a total of 6 years, including the 2 remaining years on Watson's deal and running through the 2025 season, the contract has a total value of $177.5 million, with $111 million in total guarantees. The deal was negotiated by agent David Mulugheta of Athletes First. Even with O'Brien gone, the damage has already been done, and it's going to require an excellent coaching hire if Houston ever expects to be successful. It's too early to speculate on who the replacement might be, but if the Texans don't go out and get a young, forward-thinking head coach, the absolute best-case scenario will always be a first-round playoff game adios, and almost certainly not even that. Trading away DeAndre Hopkins was such a bad move that it really does bring an end to anything that was going on here as far as an overall era of Texans football, where we're used to Houston at least making the playoffs. It's literally back to square one. But with Bill O'Brien gone, there is hope. But I don't have any faith in Houston's ability to go out and make the right coaching hire. Projecting forward, even if Houston loyal goes out and gets the right coach, in order for the team to stand a chance of reaching the playoffs, the offensive line has to step up and protect Deshaun Watson. This is a team that has had problems with the O-line for years, and it becomes even more pressing because Watson holds onto the ball for a long time. But unlike just about any other quarterback besides Russell Wilson, Watson is good when holding onto the ball. He maintains a decent success rate when holding onto the ball and letting wide receivers work themselves open, kind of like DeAndre Hopkins. But because of Watson's style of play, that makes it more difficult for the offensive line, which is why the Texans need to step up and construct decent protection for him. Michael David Smith of Pro Football Talk, quoting John Harbaugh, "Deshaun Watson will be a unique challenge because of how long he holds onto the ball. Harbaugh said that Watson is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL and that his ability to extend plays rather than throw the ball away is a big part of that. He actually holds onto the ball longer than anybody in the league," Harbaugh said. The good news is that Watson is only 24 years old. Generally speaking, the average NFL quarterback doesn't peak at 24. And especially considering the awful coaching staff he's had, it may even take longer than normal. Watson should hit his peak around 27 to 29, and maybe later as he becomes more cerebral and he doesn't have to rely as much on his mobility unless he's under pressure and needs to extend the play, a la Russell Wilson. Watson has such amazing downfield vision and downfield accuracy that if the O-line can give him enough time, he's as tough as any quarterback in the NFL. He can literally pick you apart and drop 60-yard dots all day long. Mark Lane of Texans Wire, quoting PFF's Sam Monson, "Only Jimmy Garoppolo, who benefits hugely from the scheme in San Francisco when it comes to deep shots, had a higher adjusted completion rate on deep passes than Deshaun Watson last season. Watson has the arm to make special deep passes." O'Brien did make one good move, adding Conley from the Raiders. Garyon Conley was a high first-round pick that never fit the Raiders' defensive scheme, and they just gave up on him. Houston suffered cluster injuries at the cornerback position last year, and so they brought in Conley, and he was pretty good, all things considered. With Conley missing the first few weeks of 2020, recovering from ankle surgery, it downgrades the Texans' defense even further because Conley is literally the only bright spot in the secondary. Bradley Roby is not good, and Houston is giving him way too much money. They shipped off Jadeveon Clowney a couple years ago, and they didn't get nearly enough for him, and they never have upgraded their defensive line, so now the Texans have a one-dimensional front seven that depends on J.J. Watt to do everything. And Watt is a question mark in himself as to whether he can even play all 16 games this year. So even if everything goes right, this is a defense that's going to be giving up a lot of points all year. According to Marrone of Fansided, by almost any metric, the early part of this season has been a struggle for the Texans' defensive unit. The worst aspect has been the run defense, allowing 565 yards through 3 games. The Houston Texans defense is 31st in the league in both average number of plays allowed per drive, 7.4, and average time of opponent's drive, 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The 2020 draft was another bust for the Texans. The team just didn't have a ton of draft capital. The Tunsil trade, which was good, is how they lost that capital. But it seems like Houston never has draft capital, with their first pick coming in the 2nd round from the Hopkins trade. And they took Ross Blacklock, a defensive tackle out of TCU, who, by the way, got thrown out of the Ravens game for throwing punches. That's another winner. Overall, the Texans draft was a disaster because even with the picks gained from the Hopkins trade, Houston only had 5 total draft picks. And with such a talented draft, and considering Houston has holes all over their roster, it's a shame. They didn't have the picks to do anything because they traded them all away. It's so dumb because there were a bunch of great offensive linemen in the draft in the top 10 to 20 picks, and Houston had no first-round pick to get them. And this is after the Texans took a first-round lineman in 2019, Titus Howard, who turned out not to be good enough to keep Watson alive, so they had to give up another king's ransom for Tunsil. It's just a pattern of mistakes begetting more mistakes begetting more mistakes. Pro Football Talk's Michael David Smith speaks about the Texans' future. It's hard to be optimistic about the Texans this season after their 0-3 start. And given the realities of Houston's 2020 and 2021 draft classes, it's hard to be optimistic about the Texans in the future either. Houston didn't have a single rookie play a single snap on offense or defense in Sunday's loss to the Steelers. The Texans didn't have a first-round pick this year, and the 4 rookie picks on the roster aren't contributing at all. And even worse is that there's no reason to hope next year's draft will be any better, as the Texans have already traded their first-round pick and their second-round pick in 2021 to the Dolphins for offensive tackle Laramie Tunsil. Some final thoughts on the Texans. If Houston doesn't turn this whole thing around quick, 2020 is going to end up turning into a massive collapse for the entire team. All it's going to take is Will Fuller going down and the offensive line continuing its poor play, and it's going to get really ugly. Finally, let's look at the schedule, the cherry on top of this Sunday. This is one of the toughest schedules in the league, playing quite a few playoff teams from 2019, some more than once, as well as some teams on the rise. If even half of the teams on the Texans' schedule end up in the higher end of their projected range, Houston could easily end up being a 5-win team. A couple betting notes. I don't recommend betting on the Texans until after their bye week, when the spreads will start getting out of control. And particularly look to bet on them if the price is right against the better teams on their schedule. Remember, this team still has Deshaun Watson and is capable of making a comeback. I also recommend betting the overs of most Texans games as well as live betting on them, but only bet on the Texans with a comeback on the line. Last year, the Tennessee Titans exceeded the expectations of every handicapper and analytical mind in football. Let's talk for a moment about how gutsy it was for Coach Vrabel to pull the plug on their high-end first-round franchise quarterback 6 games into the season and move to Ryan Tannehill. That took some serious backbone. Not every team would be willing to do that. Often, the sunk cost fallacy prevents teams from making a decision like that. Now, as you move through this playlist, you'll hear me mention the sunk cost fallacy a few times, so let's go over it. According to Arks and Bloomer, individuals commit the sunk cost fallacy when they continue a behavior or endeavor as a result of previously invested resources, whether it be time, money, or effort. Said another way, the sunk cost fallacy refers to a tendency for people to irrationally follow through on an activity that is not meeting their expectations because of the time and/or money they have already invested. How many times have you seen a franchise stick with a player, particularly a quarterback, year after year, expecting him to eventually become the franchise player they thought they were getting when they drafted him. It happens all the time, right? The Titans made the bold move of benching Mariota in favor of Ryan Tannehill, and they never looked back. If you look at the whole sequence of events, the Titans took a chance and brought in Tannehill after evaluating his performance in Miami and deciding that Adam Gase was the problem, not Tannehill. Now that alone is high-level thinking. Then Coach Vrabel and company lets Tannehill challenge Mariota. And then Tennessee actually has the guts to pull the plug on Mariota to avoid the sunk cost fallacy. It's really an impressive maneuver from a relatively young and not established head coach in Mike Vrabel. According to Teron Davenport at ESPN, with Tannehill at quarterback in 2019, the Titans scored 20 or more points in every game for the rest of the regular season. Their red zone percentage catapulted from 53.3%, 19th, to tops in the NFL at 77.3% over that stretch. The Titans rode Tannehill's hot hand and some punishing running from Derrick Henry all the way to the AFC Championship game. Last year, the Titans shocked the world by defeating the Patriots in the opening round of the playoffs, and then backed up that win with an even more impressive victory against the Ravens. And in Week 17, Tennessee beat the pants off the Texans just to get into the playoffs at all. So in 3 straight games, the Titans beat the 10-win Texans, Tom Brady and the Patriots, and the MVP of the league, Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Now, all of this was accomplished because of leveraging the efficient passing of Tannehill to get a lead, and then retaining that lead by taking the air out of the ball and using physical domination in the running game with Derrick Henry. The defense was also solid, with everyone doing their job. Then the Titans went to Kansas City, Mahomes went nuclear, and that was the end. John R. Kinsley of SB Nation Tennessee summarizes the Titans' season. So much good came from this season that it's not even as disappointing as it is exciting to see how much more progress this team can make in 2020. Not too many 9-7 teams reach the championship round, and the Titans did that against 2 of the AFC's best on the road. The success we saw from guys like Ryan Tannehill, Derrick Henry, and A.J. Brown proved this team had an offense to fear after years of inconsistency and years of underwhelming play. The Titans also navigated the offseason excellently. Tennessee retained Ryan Tannehill and re-signed Derrick Henry, but didn't overspend for either of them. Now, there are some doubters who don't think that the Titans saw enough of Tannehill to sign him long-term, but remember that Tannehill was a highly touted first-round pick when he first came into the league. According to Nick Shook of NFL.com, the Tennessee Titans and Tannehill have agreed to terms on a 4-year extension worth $118 million, including $62 million in fully guaranteed money and $91 million in total guarantees. The Tennessee Titans and star running back Derrick Henry have also agreed on a 4-year, $50 million contract that includes $25.5 million guaranteed. Unlike just about every other team in the NFL, I don't think that paying Derrick Henry was a bad thing. He's relatively young, as well as being such a physical specimen relative to all other running backs in the league. More importantly, it felt like Vrabel got the whole team to buy in and play their best last year during the playoff run. And the players clearly look at Henry as an integral part of the team. The signal that the signing of Derrick Henry sends to the locker room in Tennessee is the opposite of what the Hopkins trade signaled in Houston. O'Brien and the Texans said, if you want money, we're shipping you out of town. Whereas by signing Derrick Henry, Coach Vrabel told the locker room, look, we recognize how important this guy is to our team, and we know how much you care about him, so we're going to retain him. It helps that he has a skill set that isn't easy to replace with how physical of a runner he is. And he runs his best late in the season. Remember, the playoffs are also late in the season. So in my opinion, it's not a reach to expect him to build throughout the year and be more effective in January than he is in September. Mike Marrone of Titans Wire goes over the Henry contract extension. The Tennessee Titans hit a home run with Derrick Henry's contract extension. The Titans were able to secure their best player and didn't have to reset the market to do so. Tennessee also wins in terms of 2020 cap space, saving over $4 million immediately. The deal takes Henry through his age 29 season and ends just after he hits the age of 30. It gets understated what an important role wide receiver A.J. Brown has played in the Titans' success because of what an amazing season Derrick Henry had. But A.J. Brown was quietly really, really good and emerged as a true number one wide receiver. It should be noted that Brown has been dealing with an injury since week 1, but he did come back for the game against the Buffalo Bills and made a significant impact in the victory. I think if the Titans want to make another run at the Chiefs, Vrabel needs to prioritize the development of A.J. Brown and not be as dedicated to overusing Derrick Henry. We have all seen it time and time again that leaning too heavily on a running back year after year doesn't work out. Running backs don't generally have long careers where they're super high productive, and I think it's an unsustainable offensive scheme. From David Beauclair of SI.com. If Derrick Henry wins a second straight NFL rushing title, he will be the first in more than a decade and just the third since the turn of the century to do so. In other words, it does not happen often. What does get lost in the midst of all the positive developments for the Titans is the unsustainability of what they did in 2019. This is a team primed for regression, particularly in the red zone. Once Tannehill took over, 26 out of 30 possessions in the red zone were touchdowns, which is insane. To go even deeper, the amount of possessions in general that ended in touchdowns was extremely high. Teams that score that high of a number of touchdowns generally average somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% of that efficiency the next year. Regardless, we will see some drop-off in 2020. Chet Grisham of DraftKings Nation writes, 43 touchdowns to 1 field goal is the ratio the Titans have produced offensively since Week 10. The Titans' red zone touchdown percentage this season is a whopping 78%, with the next best being the Packers at 66%. If the Titans expect to repeat and challenge the Chiefs, the offensive scheme has to be focused on Tannehill and the receiving corps. The media likes to make it about Henry because he was very memorable from a highlight point of view, and a heavy dose of Henry is how the Titans always close the game. But Tannehill's passing was outstanding. His completion percentage over expectation was among the best in the NFL, and it wasn't fluky. Tannehill was making the type of 11 to 25-yard sideline passes that separate the upper echelon of NFL passers from the rest. The Titans also need to continue their nearly perfect mix of using Tannehill in the receiving corps to gain leads and then handing the ball to Henry to take the air out and use the clock to their advantage. Teron Davenport of ESPN explains, there are layers to the success the Titans experienced last season. A lot of things fell into place, mostly the performances by Tannehill, running back Derrick Henry, and wide receiver A.J. Brown. Offensive coordinator Arthur Smith believes the Titans have a lot of guys that can take it to the house and vows to showcase them as an explosive unit overall. Smith is working on ways to get more creative and make sure more players get touches because he doesn't want to see a regression in explosive plays. The defense is solid. If I had to pinpoint one area for improvement, Tennessee doesn't have an amazing pass rush. But the addition of Jadeveon Clowney was literally the perfect fit for this team. It's really crazy how well Clowney fits in, and that's going to show itself later in the season. The Titans do have outstanding linebacker play and a solid secondary. So they have a top half of the league roster overall, and they're in the conversation for borderline top 10. Even with the success of last season, I would expect a lot of teams to overlook the Titans, which could play into our favor, particularly when we're live betting second half spreads. My final thoughts on the Titans: the ceiling for this team is a championship. This is a team capable of taking it all the way. Looking at their schedule, most of Tennessee's season is one giant coin flip, but going into their bye week 3-0 was the best case scenario for the team. But after beating Buffalo in Week 5, Houston in Week 6, and barely losing to the Steelers in Week 7, the toughest 3-game stretch of the season is already over. So basically, Tennessee has one trip to Minnesota and one trip to Cincinnati over a 10-week stretch, which is a perfect scenario to stay healthy and intact as a unit in an uncertain season. This is a really friendly schedule overall, and even after Week 10, the schedule isn't that rough, just a lot of road games. If you've listened to the information I've given you throughout the video, you now know how to bet on the AFC South from Week 1 through the playoffs. You also know how to attack the NFL betting market in 2020, and you know how to pick the right spots to make money on each team. I seriously do want to know what you think about my projections for these teams. Whether you think I'm totally crazy or I gave you some good information that's helped you win some bets over the course of the season, make sure and let me know in the comments. I will respond. Also, consider heading over to my website, aosportspicks.com. and sign up for a sports betting package where you can get my picks each week. Finally, make sure and subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and click the notification bell so you get notified whenever I release a new video. Doing that really helps me, and it also helps the channel get placed higher in the YouTube search results so more people can see this content and the channel grows. Once again, I'm Alpha Omega. See you next time.